Annette, a few years ago you published a book called Unequal Childhoods, in which you described very different child rearing regimes for poor households in the United States as opposed to middle class or upper middle class households. Could you describe the different approaches to child rearing and the pluses and minuses of each approach?
Yes, in my book, Unequal Childhoods, we found that all parents really want their children to be healthy and happy, and that's universal. But in the study, we did observations and we visited families in their home, usually every day for 3 weeks. We also did interviews with 88 parents, and half of our parents were white and half were African American, and children were 10 years old. And what we found was that middle-class parents saw their children as a project. They saw them as seeking to develop their talents and skills. And so they, in many ways, customized their daily life. They reasoned with them, they answered questions with questions, they enrolled them in many organized activities, and they also supervised their schooling and their doctor visits. They intervened. And through that, they created a sense of entitlement for their children, for middle-class families. And by middle-class families, we mean people who have a college degree. It's not so much on income, but on education and the kind of jobs they have, professional jobs. The working class and poor families differed. The white and black families also wanted their children to grow and thrive, but for them, rather than treating their children as a project, they used scarce resources to help their children be safe, to have good housing, to have clean clothes and food. And then they presumed that their children would spontaneously grow and thrive. So for them, the working class parents, they gave them directives. They said, don't do that. They didn't answer questions with questions. The children watched TV, they played with their cousins, they hung out. They were not involved in many organized activities. And the working class parents depended on the experts, the doctors and the teachers, to supervise their children. They didn't try to supervise them themselves. So middle class parents had a different way of raising children than the working class and poor. There were differences between working class and poor families. There were food shortages in poor families that there weren't in blue-collar families. But in this area, looking at how parents raised the children, the working class and poor children were very similar, and the white and black children were very similar. So the white middle-class boy, who in the book we call Garrett Tallinger, had a very similar life to the black middle-class boy, Alexander Williams. There was a huge difference between the experience of Alexander Williams, the middle-class boy whose dad was a lawyer and mom was a high-level professional, and the boy, Harold McAllister, who grew up in a poor home, who was African American.
And you have different terms for these two different child rearing strategies.
That's right. In Unequal Childhoods, I call the middle-class strategy concerted cultivation. It's a gardening analogy. In the working class and poor family, I call the accomplishment of natural growth. So just as wildflowers are beautiful and hothouse flowers are beautiful, these are different strategies. But it's not the intrinsic nature of the strategy that matters. What matters is that children enter institutions, and those institutions have rules, rules of the game. So middle-class families, in the book, Alexander Williams is having dinner, and his dad is washing the dishes, and he has to do a rhyme. And they're talking about it, and his dad's joking, and they begin to talk about the word plagiarism and copyright. Well, plagiarism is a word that would appear maybe on an SAT test or an achievement test, and here it is after dinner, an African-American middle-class family, he's being taught that word. In the working class and poor families, there was much more silence. It was a friendly silence, but there was simply less talking. People sat around and they were together. And so the working class and poor families, the children knew fewer words when they entered kindergarten. But knowing how many words is a very important predictor of what reading group you'll be in. Learning how to read is, you could say, the 800-pound gorilla of schooling. Reading is central for academic achievement.
So you went back to many of these families and followed them up. Was it a decade later?
I did.
And what did you find? Were there surprises? Did concerted cultivation and natural growth seem to reproduce class position?
When I finished Unequal Childhoods, I was unclear about how things would unfold. And I did keep in touch with the children. I sent a Christmas card with the $5 tucked into it. And I would talk to them from time to time. I was invited to some high school graduation parties. I did interview them a decade later. If they had gone to college, and most did not, It would have been at the end of their freshman year. And there really were no surprises. I would say it was sad. Many of the working class and poor children had wanted to do well. Their parents had wanted them to do well. But things had not worked out. So many of them dropped out of high school. Some of them graduated from high school. But they were all in blue-collar jobs or unemployed. Not one was in the professional sector. The middle-class families, it wasn't always easy sailing. For Garrett Tallinger got his heart broken. Melanie Hanlon had a friend killed in a car accident. It's not that bad things don't happen to middle-class kids, they do. But in terms of being launched, in terms of their life chances, they were much more likely to go to college, and their parents helped them and supervised them in college. So their parents helped them choose their college classes, they gave them advice on their majors, and so the parents continued to provide guidance and help as they went into adulthood. Alexander Williams, the middle-class African-American boy, is now going to become a doctor. Garrett Tallinger ended up leaving soccer behind and playing basketball with a scholarship. He became a high-level manager. He has a suit and tie. His face is shining, smiling on the web. And Katie Brindle ended up dropping out of high school.
What exactly happened in the poor and working class families' lives that caused the kids, despite the high aspirations of dropping out of high school or going no further than a high school degree?
Well, one thing that was very important was the schools that they attended. And schools are very unequal in America. And almost all the parents in the working class and poor families said that it was a bad high school that they went to. And they tried to get them into other high schools, but that was often didn't work out. And private school was expensive, and they didn't have scarce resources. The other thing that happened is that many of the parents wanted their children to go to college. But college is a very complicated set of institutions. And to apply to college involves many, many, many steps. You have to, so there's sort of a famous table about the National Longitudinal Survey. And it starts with, in high school, do you want to go to college? And if you want to go to college, did you take, say, advanced algebra? Did you take the classes you needed to apply to college? And the number of kids whose parents are middle class is very high. The number of kids whose parents who are high school graduates it drops. So they want to go to college. Did they take the classes? Then, did they take the SAT or the ACT? It drops again. Did they apply to college? It drops again. And if they got in, did they go? And so by the end, you have these divergent pathways between the parents who are middle class and the parents who are working class, despite the aspirations. So one of the girls who was actually not featured in the book, named Tara Carroll, was dropped for space reasons, actually. She is an African-American young woman. Her mother dropped out of high school, deeply religious family, raised by a grandmother. She really wanted to go to college. She applied to 8 colleges, but her SAT scores under the old system were a combined score of 700. So they were really about as low as you can get. But that's a very typical SAT score in urban America. And those are people who take the SAT. And then she applied to colleges, but she applied to colleges that were 200 and 300 points above her SAT. Now, if she had been my daughter, could I have gotten her into a school? Probably. I would have found a school that would have taken a child who had a learning disability or had low scores, and I could have placed her in college. It would have taken a lot of work. But in her system, her mother depended on the school to help her daughter go to college. So the mother didn't see the applications, and the mother had a car, but she didn't go on college tours. It was up to her daughter and the school. And that is a reasonable decision. Her daughter was rejected everywhere, and she ended up going to community college for a semester and dropping out, which is a very typical pattern for working class families.